Contains 2 million tons of copper to date. It's open in all directions, has lots of significant upside. It's already a significant project.
Hello to those tuning in to the Assay TV, where today I'm joined by Ian Harris, the CEO of Libero Copper. Libero Copper are a mineral exploration company with a portfolio of copper porphyry projects across the Americas in prolific yet stable jurisdictions. Hey, welcome, Ian. Thank you for joining us on the Assay TV.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. So just to kick things off, can you give us a quick introduction to Libero and share some of its key projects?
Yeah, Libero is focused on the development of copper projects in the Americas. So we have the Big Red project in British Columbia, Canada, the Mocoa project in Colombia, and the Esperanza project in Argentina. And again, we're focused on projects that have the potential to become future mines.
Okay, excellent. So let's talk a little bit about copper. What are your thoughts on copper at the moment and the markets?
So I'm a mining engineer with 25 years of experience in the industry, and most of those 15 of those years in Latin America. And it's still hard for me to get my head around when we hear deficits coming up in 7 years of 8 million tons of copper. And what does that mean? And the 10 largest mines in the world produce 5 million tons. So we're seeing, and oh, by the way, 60% of the world's copper is controlled by China. Over 40% is smelted, and an additional 20% from national and offtake agreements. So we're really going through a massive geopolitical shift around copper. And one of the reasons we like the focus on the Americas for that implication.
So you just mentioned that you are actually a mining engineer. Can you go a little bit more into your background and how this kind of affects your approach to project development?
Yeah, so as a mining engineer, I look at projects in terms of whether or not they can become future mines, right? That is the whole purpose. And the purpose is developing a strategy that can get them down the line, not just the next hole result or a little flash in the pan. The idea is to have a sustainable project. And a little bit of my background, I was previously the senior vice president and country manager for Corriente Resources, and led the team that took the Mirador project all the way through sales, stayed on board for a year afterwards, and started this construction of that project. It was the first large-scale industrial project in the history of Ecuador, and one of the reasons that I joined the Libero team is, and it really is, and Ernie Mast is a director of the company who did almost the same thing in Cobre Panama as CEO of Inmet's Cobre Panama. So sharing notes of what's required to advance large-scale projects in the Americas, and it's a lot more than technical or drilling. It's a combination of social, political, and national reputation.
Excellent. So let's look further at the Mocoa project. Where are we in terms of advancement with infrastructure and access to the project at the moment?
So the Macaw Project is kind of our flagship. I'm actually based in Medellin now full time. That's where I'm calling and talking for today. Contains 2 million tons of copper to date. It's open in all directions, has lots of significant upside. It's already a significant project. It also has a historical pre-feasibility study associated to it. So right now we know it's a bona fide project. We know it's got the grades, the size, the scale, et cetera, potential to be a game changer. So the majority of the focus is, while we're continuing to look at a lot of the studies, and of course there'll be future expansion, the important part is working locally, creating relationships, building a reputation nationally, and creating political will. So that is our major focus right now in Colombia.
So that sort of nicely leads me to my next question. What is it actually like working in Colombia, and what's the environment like at the moment?
So, projects of this size and scale go through multiple presidencies. Colombia is a limit of a 4-year term. And so we're with a new president who's taken some pretty radical shifts. in Colombia, especially focused towards oil and coal, which, by the way, make up 60% of the Colombia's exports. So it's a major component of the economy. And there's a push to move away and towards energy transition. But whether it's political or whether it's the world just doesn't need it anymore, Colombia is moving away and is now focused on advancing and reindustrialization of the country based on strategic metals. And that really creates a lot of a mixed conversation about Colombia. But on the ground, I can tell you that it's extremely focused on having some of these underpinning projects, advancing them to help reindustrialize the country. It's not just about having a couple more exports. The country really needs new industries to kind of fill in that hole that's going to be created by oil, gas, and coal.
So as you obviously mentioned the multiple presidencies, in your recent news flow, you actually announced that you've initiated a partnership with the Colombian government. Can you go into some detail about that and what the details mean for you as a company?
So for me, these are probably the most, even as a mining engineer, are probably some of the most critical components of advancing projects like this. I remember in Ecuador, there was kind of 4 projects that were mentioned by at that time, the Minister of Mines as these are my priority projects. And by the way, on today's dollars, every single one of them today is worth or sold for over $1 billion. So that part is really overlooked. So having those relationships to create a political will also means political will is created because people don't want to lose votes either. So there's a desire, but it's also supported locally and nationally. So it has to be a popular concept too. So we've been working directly with the government, especially through the Ministry of Industry, to create an alliance to start building the backbones to a production chain. And so that was the announcement, including national universities that have to be a huge part of this. And as you mentioned, going through multiple presidencies, we're in pretty fairly advanced conversations with some kind of staple public-private entities within the country to make sure that independent there's a combined desire to advance projects together. There's skin in the game for that this must be successful.
Excellent. So let's take a shift to the geology of the project. You recently completed a field program at Mocoa. What did the field program show? Were there any anomalies?
So previously, we had some significant anomalies based on geophysics and then following up with geochemistry. Mocoa is in the Jurassic Porphyry Belt, which is famous for clustered porphyries. You have Mirador, Mirador Norte, Pananza, San Carlos, and Warrenza has probably like Windsor north, south, east, west, northwest. I mean, it's a lot of this clustering happens on these types of projects. But another big part was following up on that information and mapping it on the ground and finding a significant lithocap on the ground shows that it's really, even at 2 million tons of copper and over 600 million tons of resource at the project right now, that it's still in its infancy, that has lots of room to continue to grow.
And what are the next steps in terms of building that and making it grow now you found the lithocaps?
So it's an interesting question for us, because obviously there's still a massive amount of work that can go on the ground when you have like 6 additional targets within the area. You're doing mapping and following up on geochemistry, et cetera. And as it's, I think becoming clear, we're going, if you're underpinning a production chain in the country based on future production, then getting into production is fairly important, right? And so it's going to be, I think, a combination of continuing to advance it on a project development and at the same time expansion. So there's some significant step outs we'll be doing, testing new targets. So really the next big steps are testing these targets through drilling.
Excellent. So we've looked at Mocoa. Let's move on to your Esperanza project in San Juan. What's happening there? Is there any update?
Yeah, so again, we finally kind of followed a similar roadmap where you develop relationships locally and you work on it in San Juan, I could say on a province level, and develop real relationships also on the political side based on shared interests and alignment. So first of all, Esperanza is one of those, geological dreams. Its last drill hole, I think first from surface, the first 200 meters were over a 1% equivalent copper and over 300 meters at a 0.75. And it ended, and that was as deep as the drill went. So lots of interesting geology. But again, we're building that relationships locally, and we've been working with the minister on making sure when this project advances, it's closer to, while it's not up in the high Andes and it's not in glaciers or bordering two countries, and it's a year-round drill program, it's closer to communities. We're talking, 30 kilometers away, but still it's closer to populations, to make sure that when we come out, we're coming out together, showing strength. And we're right now in the ultimate steps of permitting. So we have high expectations that we'll be able to get it across those last bureaucratic administrative steps. The relationships are there. The barriers have been passed, and it's now just checking and signing and filling the last little reports out. So we do expect to be drilling in Esperanza this year.
Excellent. So obviously all of these things cost money, all this exploration activity. How well financed are you looking for 2023?
So we put in the money in place to ensure that we can get across some of these key catalysts. What Colombia, it's more about ensuring that when this project advances, that it's on solid footing, has all the government supports in place. They want to work with us together, and Esperanza is getting the permit. We also have an over-the-counter in place, so that once we start moving and bigger money is needed for drilling, that we're also prepared. So I think we're well positioned to get things across the finish line, and then get into some key catalysts that create significant value for shareholders.
Right. So you mentioned the key catalysts. Just to round things up, what can investors look out for in 2023? Some key milestones.
I know I'm probably sounding like I'm beating a dead horse, but that little triangle of social, political, and national reputation create more value and de-risk projects more than any drill result, right? And so those are probably the key catalysts that, although I wish people could, they were as exciting as that, the certain intersects, they're key. Like the two closest copper mines built and active and operating today were put in the production or start of construction, or getting it across the permitting final finish line, is in the Libero team. So we've done this before. So, a little bit of trust when that news continues to mature, it's really important. And then, so those are key catalysts. And then obviously the drilling, right? The nice thing about Mocoa, it's significantly de-risked geologically. It's already got a massive resource. So we know it will continue to be putting out those numbers. So I think it's going to be like a 1-2 punch on two separate projects that are going to be de-risking significantly and putting out significant, exciting results.
Well, it certainly sounds like there's a big year ahead for Libero, and we thank you so much for joining us today. Hopefully we'll catch up soon.
Thank you, Katie.